Hi everyone, my name is Luke Mandouit and I'm at the Science of Learning Centre at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education, and today I'm here with Dr. Cam Brooks from the University of Queensland. Cam's leading a research project into feedback and his PhD was in feedback, so we're going to have a chat about feedback in the classroom and think about how teachers can really use the science of learning in this specific area to really have some impact in their classrooms. Thanks for coming in, Cam. So first of all, why feedback? Aren't we already doing this?
Of course we are. Us as teachers, we're constantly giving feedback. I guess the problem is that our students are telling us that they're not always receiving the feedback. And if they're not receiving it, therefore they can't use it and act on it in that sense. There are a few key reasons to this. Sometimes there's a different understanding of what feedback is. Often students are telling us that they think good feedback is improvement based. When we look at the feedback that we give as teachers, it's often quite evaluative, saying what students did or didn't do in that sense. Often our feedback comes at the end of the learning period, and students definitely report that when they see a grade on a piece of work, that they feel as though learning's over in that sense. So again, they'd be less likely to attend to the feedback. And a lot of the feedback that we give is to the self, to the person. And we can look at different types of feedback, feedback to the self, such as praise, that can actually inhibit further learning happening. So I guess what I'm trying to say, Luke, is it's not really about the quantity of feedback in that sense. It's much more about the quality of the feedback.
So you say that a lot of feedback comes at the end. So if we're to flip things on its head and think about feedback from the start of the learning sequence, the start of the learning journey, and really presenting to students and clarifying what success looks like, how would that look in a classroom?
Sure. I mean, I say to teachers that we all have a certain amount of feedback effort. You know, our job is endless in a sense. We could keep helping each individual student, but somewhere along the line we all draw the line in that sense. And if our feedback, it just happens to be that much of our feedback effort is happening at the end. And if the research is telling us that the students are less likely to attend, or the feedback window is shortening when they're getting feedback late or at the end of the learning period, what would happen if we flipped things, as you said, and what would happen if we changed things up? And the feedback model that we're using asks that first question for the learner: where am I going? What does success look like? And I think that's something that we know as teachers that we should be doing, but we get caught up in the hurly-burly of getting through all that content, and it's often something that we might overlook. Or we might think that we've told the students, but again, it's that what's told and is that received, as in, is everything that I've taught learnt? Not necessarily. So we need to look at different ways that we can clarify success for learners. And I guess we've got two real strategies or resources in a sense. It's more the practice than the resource that we can use. And it's really about the success criteria and the models. How can we use those as learning experiences in the classroom where the students can actively engage with them to build their understanding or their nose for quality, so that when they get to start work independently, they're starting at a higher level or with greater depth of understanding. They're not starting from scratch in that sense.
So once the learning sequence is well on the way and there's a clear understanding of the where am I going, as far as this idea of the how am I going, this answering the question of the feedback, how and when should I give feedback to my learners during that learning sequence?
And of course, it's unsurprising that the feedback research from the learner's voice tells us that they are frustrated when they find out the how am I going at the end. This is what you should or shouldn't have done. You know? And learners want to know that earlier. And the technique that we use for that as teachers is formative assessment. You know? And of course, our formative assessment should be mapped back from our summative assessment. And we've got to really bear in mind what formative assessment is. What's its purpose? It's for us as the teacher to form decisions about the next steps of learning for the students. And it's a real skill, and it's not surprising that highly effective teachers are very well practiced in using formative assessment. Often we tend to plan content, dot point content and so on. Sometimes we might need to think, what's a good question that I can ask? What's a good learning activity that I can do that will show me who's ready to progress, who needs further consolidation, or who do I need to go back a step for?
And that brings us to a really good point in this idea of the feed forward, the where am I going, the where to next, answering the question of next time around, how do I continue to improve? And also thinking about this idea of self-regulation. Obviously that's a goal for us to develop that capacity in our learners. So as far as this idea of self-regulation and the feed forward, what would you say to teachers regarding those 2 points?
Sure. That third question of the feedback model, in a sense of what is my next step, that's really about closing the loop. If we think of feedback as a loop, or if we think of it as a gap, the standard gap between where my learners are in relation to where they need to be. And that's that improvement-based feedback. And remember that that's what students say is the most helpful for them, that's the good feedback in a sense. And we need to think of other ways that we can do it. It doesn't need to be this one-to-many model of me as the teacher with my 28 or 30 students, and I'm trying to deliver a different message for each one. We need to think, how can we bring students on board in this process? And if we've laid that platform for self-regulation at the start, where we've started to build their knowledge of what success looks like, how can we use practices such as peer feedback, and resources such as learning ladders or bump it up walls and so on, so that students can start to see where they're at and they have something tangible to have conversations about how they can move forward.
So in thinking about all the points you've mentioned, Cam, teachers have a very challenging role in the sense that there are so many students in the classroom, varying levels of ability, so many questions that need to be answered. What would your advice be to teachers, one or two quick points in regards to really maximising their impact in this feedback space?
I think I'll try and keep it simple and try and look at one key takeaway here. And I think we need to be mindful of who's active and who's passive in the feedback experience. It tends to be typically us as the teacher who's active. We're often the ones who are reviewing students' work, making notes, corrections, writing improvement, or having conversations where we're giving the feedback in that sense. If we know that students don't always receive that feedback, that they might not be attending to it, and if we also consider how well we'll learn best, and we often don't learn best passively by being told. We often tend to learn best by being active and being hands-on. So I guess a good takeaway to sort of sum up the feedback model is, let's try and make our learners active in the feedback model. At that first step, let's try and clarify understanding so learners know where they're going. Let's generate and facilitate formative assessment processes along the way so students know how they're going. They know if they're on track or not for success. And let's try and bring in peers and other resources such as checklists and bump it up walls and so on, but use them in meaningful ways so that students can start to, along with us as the teacher and their peers, start to form decisions about improvement.
And of course, this is built on a culture of trust and a climate of growth in your classroom to really maximise, the uptake of that feedback, I imagine.
Of course, if those relationships aren't there and that challenging yet supportive environment isn't there, if those relationships aren't there between teacher and student or teacher and peers, then students are more likely to withdraw and hold back, and we need them to have a go. That's the only way we can see where they're at, so we know where we can start to pitch the feedback.